The morning sun hung low over the rolling hills of Franklin, Tennessee, casting golden rays across the white steeple of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The air was thick with the scent of magnolias and the weight of grief. Inside, the pews were packed with mourners, family, friends, hospital co-workers, and a striking contingent of 30 Marines in their dress blues, their white gloves resting solemnly on their knees. The church was a sanctuary of sorrow, adorned with white roses and American flags, all in honor of Emily Grace Thompson, a woman whose love had anchored a warrior through 2 decades of war and peace. Outside, John Bear Sullivan, a 42-year-old retired Marine gunnery sergeant, stood alone on the church steps. At 6'3" and 240 pounds, Bear was a towering figure, his broad frame straining against the seams of a black suit that hadn't been worn since his last Marine Corps ball. His face, etched with scars from an IED blast in Kandahar, bore the marks of a man who had seen too much. His hands trembled, not just from the weight of losing Emily, his wife of 20 years, to a merciless battle with leukemia, but from the PTSD that had haunted him since his final tour. Bear had earned his nickname not for his size, though it fit, but for his relentless courage. The way he'd charged through hell to protect his squad. He'd survived 3 deployments, earned a Purple Heart and a Silver Star, and had been the rock his unit leaned on when chaos reigned. But Emily's death had shattered something inside him that no enemy fire could touch. Emily had been his compass, his reason to keep fighting when the world felt like it was collapsing. They'd met when Bear was a cocky young lance corporal and she was a nursing student with a smile that could light up a battlefield. For 20 years, she'd been his home, raising their 2 kids, 17-year-old Ethan and 14-year-old Lily, while Bear was halfway across the globe, dodging bullets. Now, 3 days after her death, Bear felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing to hold on to. He'd stepped outside during the funeral service because the walls of St. Paul's felt like they were closing in. The hum of prayers, the press of bodies, the suffocating grief, it was too much. His medication dulled the edges, but it couldn't quiet the storm in his chest. He needed air, space, a moment to steady himself before delivering the eulogy he'd rewritten a dozen times. Words that still felt inadequate to capture Emily's light. Sitting on the church steps, Bear pressed his head into his hands, trying to summon her voice, the way she'd whisper, "Breathe, John. Count to 10. You're stronger than this." Those words had pulled him through panic attacks before, but today they felt like echoes fading into the void. "Sir, you need to move along," came a sharp voice from behind. Bear looked up, squinting against the sun. A young police officer, badge gleaming on his crisp uniform, stood a few feet away. Officer Ryan Carter, 25, had been on the Franklin PD for barely 6 months. His hand rested on his taser, his posture rigid, with the kind of bravado only a rookie could muster. Carter had heard a vague radio call about a suspicious individual loitering near the church and had zeroed in on Bear, a scarred, hulking man sitting alone on the step. To Carter, he looked like trouble waiting to happen. "Officer, I'm sorry," Bear said, his voice low, steady despite the grief clawing at him. "This is my wife's funeral. I just needed some air." Carter's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He didn't budge. "I don't care what's going on. We got a call about suspicious activity, and you're the guy they described. I need to see some ID. Now." Bear's fists clenched, the familiar heat of frustration rising in his chest. He'd dealt with cops like this before, young, eager to flex their authority, blind to context. But today, of all days, his patience was a fraying thread. "Officer, I'm not causing trouble. I'm a retired Marine here for my wife's service. My ID's in my jacket. Can I reach for it?" "Keep your hands where I can see them," Carter snapped, his voice rising, sharp enough to draw glances from passers-by. His hand tightened on the taser, fingers twitching with nervous energy. "Don't reach for anything." Inside the church, the soft organ music paused as mourners near the stained glass windows caught the commotion outside. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hawk Reynolds, Bear's former squad leader, leaned forward in his pew, his instincts kicking in. He'd served with Bear through the worst of Fallujah, seen him pull men from burning Humvees, and knew the look of a man on the edge. Quietly, Hawk slipped out a side door, his dress blues crisp, his eyes scanning the scene. Bear moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for his wallet to avoid any misunderstanding. "I'm just getting my ID, officer," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "My wife's body is inside that church. I'm not your enemy." But Carter wasn't listening. Pumped up on adrenaline and a need to assert control, he saw Bear's movement as a threat. "I said don't move," he shouted, drawing his taser. The air crackled with tension. Bear's eyes, cold and steady, locked onto Carter's. He'd faced down insurgents, stared into the barrels of AK-47S, and walked away from explosions that should have killed him. A rookie cop with a taser wasn't going to break him. "Son," Bear said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I've buried better men than you'll ever be, and right now you're standing between me and my wife's grave." Carter's smirk twisted, his ego bruised by Bear's defiance. "What are you going to do, tough guy? Cry about it? Like you did when they carried her out in a box?" The words hit like a grenade, ripping through Bear's composure. His vision blurred, the scars on his face burning as if the shrapnel was fresh. He took a step forward, fists tight, every muscle screaming to act. But before he could respond, Hawk rounded the corner, his presence like a storm cloud breaking the horizon. "Officer, what's the problem here?" Hawk asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a man who'd led Marines through hell. His dress blues gleamed, the ribbons on his chest a testament to his own sacrifices. Carter spun, taser still drawn, his confidence faltering for a split second. "Stay back. This is police business." "This is Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan," Hawk said, stepping closer, his eyes never leaving Carter. "He's a decorated Marine, here for his wife's funeral. I can vouch for him." "I don't care if he's the damn president," Carter snapped, his voice shrill now. "He's not complying with lawful orders." Bear's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Hawk with a subtle shake of his head, a signal they'd used in combat. Don't escalate. But Carter was beyond reason, his radio crackling as he called, "Possible suspect, resisting arrest, need backup," painting Bear as a threat. Inside St. Paul, the murmurs of the congregation grew louder. The organist faltered and heads turned toward the windows. Master Sergeant Elena Viper Cruz, Bear's former platoon sergeant, stood from her pew, her sharp eyes catching the flash of blue uniforms outside. She moved toward the door, her steps silent but purposeful. Behind her, the other Marines began to rise, their movements disciplined, their faces hard with the instinct to protect one of their own. On the steps, Carter's taunts grew sharper. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Above the law 'cause you played soldier?" Bear's voice was a low growl, the kind that had silenced rowdy recruits and steadied men under fire. "The difference between us, officer, is I know what honor looks like. You're about to learn what happens when you spit on it." Carter's hand twitched on the taser, his pride warring with the growing unease in his gut. He didn't see the church doors open behind him. He didn't hear the soft creak of boots on the steps. But he was about to feel the weight of 30 Marines, their loyalty forged in blood and fire, descending like a tide to stand with their brother. The air outside St. Paul's Episcopal Church crackled with a tension so thick it felt like the prelude to a thunderstorm. On the steps, John Bear Sullivan's massive frame loomed, his scarred face a mask of barely contained rage, as Officer Ryan Carter's taser gleamed in the Tennessee sunlight. Carter's taunt, sharp, cruel, slicing into Bear's grief like shrapnel, had pushed the retired Marine to the edge. The words, "Cry about it like you did when they carried her out in the box," echoed in Bear's ears, each syllable a fresh wound over the raw ache of losing Emily. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hawk Reynolds, Bear's brother-in-arms from Fallujah, stood a few feet away, his dress blues immaculate, his voice steady but laced with warning. "Officer, you're making a mistake," Hawk said, his eyes locked on Carter. "This man's a hero. He's burying his wife today. Let's de-escalate this. Carter's smirk didn't waver, his grip tightening on the taser. I don't take orders from you, soldier. He's resisting. Step back, or you're next. Bear's fists clenched, his knuckles white, the scars on his hands. Ern pulling a wounded Marine from a burning Humvee, stretching taut. He wanted to speak, to reason, but the grief and fury churning inside him drowned out words. He saw Emily's face, her gentle smile fading, her voice whispering, "Breathe, John." But the air felt like fire in his lungs. Carter's radio crackled, his voice sharp as he barked, "Suspect, non-compliant, possible threat, requesting immediate backup." The words painted Bear as a danger, a man to be subdued, not a grieving husband struggling to hold himself together. Inside St. Paul's, the congregation stirred, the organ's mournful notes faltering as heads turned toward the windows. Master Sergeant Elena Viper Cruz, a woman whose voice had rallied Marines under mortar fire, caught the rising shouts outside. Her eyes narrowed, her instincts screaming that one of her own was in trouble. She rose from her pew, her dress blues a stark contrast to the black-clad mourners, and moved toward the door. Behind her, the 30 Marines, men and women, who'd fought beside Bear, bled with him, trusted him with their lives, began to follow, their steps silent but heavy with purpose. Outside, Carter's patience snapped. "Last chance, tough guy," he shouted, his voice shrill with adrenaline. Bear, still reaching slowly for his wallet, froze as Carter's finger twitched on the taser's trigger. "Don't do it," Hawk warned, stepping closer. His hands raised, but his posture coiled, ready to act. Carter didn't listen. The taser fired, twin barbs shooting out, piercing Bear's chest. 50,000 volts surged through him, and the 240-pound Marine dropped like a felled oak, his body convulsing on the church steps, where Emily's casket lay just yards away. His head cracked against the stone, blood trickling from a gash above his scarred brow. The sound of his fall, a dull, sickening thud, echoed like a gun. Hawk lunged forward, shouting, "Marine down! Marine down!" A cry that carried the weight of a battlefield, a call that summoned every brother and sister within earshot. The church doors burst open, and what emerged wasn't chaos, but a disciplined force. 30 Marines in dress blues, moving with the precision of a unit forged in combat. Viper Cruz took point, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her eyes blazing as she saw Bear writhing on the ground, his dress suit torn, the taser barbs still embedded in his chest. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his eyes wide with the terror of a man no longer in Franklin, Tennessee, but back in Kandahar, under fire, watching his squad die. Carter, now facing a wall of Marines, faltered, his taser shaking in his hand. He was resisting. "You tased a Purple Heart recipient at his wife's funeral?" Viper's voice was low, deadly, each word a hammer strike. "You better pray you've got a good lawyer, kid." Bear's convulsions slowed, but his mind was a battlefield. "Incoming, incoming," he screamed, his voice raw, clawing at the steps as if digging for cover in the Afghan dust. His PTSD, strained by grief and now shattered by the taser's jolt, had dragged him back to hell. In his mind, he saw Emily, not in her hospital bed, but bleeding out in the sand, calling his name. "No, not her, not her," he roared, tears streaming down his scarred face, mixing with the blood from his brow. The sight broke something in the Marines. These were men and women who'd seen Bear carry a dying corporal 2 miles through enemy fire, who'd watched him hold a squad together when hope was gone. To see him broken, humiliated, at the foot of the church where his wife lay in her casket, it was more than they could bear. Ethan Sullivan, Bear's 17-year-old son, pushed through the crowd, his face pale but fierce. Dad, it's me," he cried, dropping to his knees beside his father. "You're safe. You're at Mom's funeral." Ethan's voice cracked, his hands shaking as he gripped Bear's arm, trying to anchor him to the present. The sight of a teenage boy comforting his war hero father while a rookie cop stood over them with a taser was a gut punch to everyone watching. Carter's backup arrived. 3 patrol cars screeching to a halt, 6 officers piling out, hands on their holsters. They froze, taking in the surreal scene. 7 cops against 30 Marines, a tased veteran convulsing on church steps, and a growing crowd of mourners spilling out of St. Paul's, cell phones recording every second. The standoff was a powder keg, one spark away from explosion. "Stand down!" Viper shouted to her Marines, her voice commanding instant obedience. But their eyes burned with fury, their fists clenched, ready to defend their brother. The officers, outmatched and outclassed, shifted uneasily, their training no match for the raw loyalty of the Corps. Carter, sweating now, tried to justify himself. He was acting aggressive. I followed protocol. Aggressive, Hawk snarled, stepping forward, his ribbons gleaming. He was grieving his wife, you idiot. That's his wife's casket in there. The church doors opened again, and Father Thomas Callahan emerged, his white robes flowing, his face etched with the calm authority of a man who'd served as a Navy chaplain in Iraq. At 60, he'd comforted dying Marines, prayed over mass graves, and knew the cost of war better than most. Beside him stood Ethan, still clutching his father's hand, and Lily, Bear's 14-year-old daughter, her eyes red but fierce, refusing to leave her dad's side. "Father," Callahan said, his voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "This is John Sullivan, a decorated Marine. He's here to bury Emily, his wife of 20 years. A Gold Star family member who died 3 days ago. Whatever happened here, it's a misunderstanding." The priest's words hung heavy, shamming the officers into silence. Even Carter's bravado wavered, his taser lowering slightly, but the damage was done. Bear, still on the ground, was slipping in and out of his flashback, muttering, "Emily, where's Emily?" His broken voice, asking for the wife he'd never hold again, tore at the heart of every witness. Sergeant Michael Hayes, a 15-year veteran of the Franklin PD, stepped forward, his face grim. He'd served with reservists, knew the look of a man scarred by war. "Carter, what the hell did you do?" he demanded, his voice low but furious. He wouldn't comply. Carter insisted, but his voice cracked, his confidence crumbling under the weight of 30 Marine stares, and Father Callahan's quiet authority. Hayes turned to Viper. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened." "It didn't just happen," Viper shot back. "Your officer tased a grieving husband at his wife's funeral. Fix this." Now, Bear's breathing grew erratic, his flashback deepening. "They're gone. All gone," he gasped, his hands clawing at the steps. Ethan knelt closer, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, Mom's inside. We're here. You're home." Lily, trembling, laid her small hand on Bear's shoulder, her voice a whisper. "Daddy, please come back." The sight of Bear, a man who'd faced death without flinching, reduced to a broken shell, surrounded by his children and his Marines, was unbearable. Mourners wept openly, their cell phones still recording, capturing a tragedy unfolding in real time. The hashtag Justice for Bear was already forming in their minds, a cry for a hero wronged. Lieutenant Sarah Whitaker, the watch commander, arrived, her SUV skidding to a stop. A 20-year veteran, she took one look at the scene, Bear on the ground, Ethan and Lily beside him, 30 Marines in formation, 7 cops outmatched, and her face darkened. "Hayes, brief me," she snapped. Hayes recounted the disaster in clipped tones, Carter's call, the tasing, the escalation. Whitaker's jaw tightened with each word. "You tased a Silver Star recipient at his wife's funeral," she repeated, her voice incredulous, turning to Carter. "Are you out of your damn mind?" Carter stammered. He was reaching for something. Was reaching for his wallet," Hawk roared, his restraint fraying, "to show you his ID like you asked." Whitaker raised a hand, silencing the chaos. She turned to Viper and Master Sergeant David Titan Brooks, the senior Marine present, a grizzled legend who'd served from Desert Storm to Syria. "Sergeant Major, on behalf of the Franklin Police Department, I apologize. This was a catastrophic failure. Officer Carter will face consequences." Titan nodded, his eyes cold but respectful. Lieutenant, we appreciate that, but right now this Marine needs to get back to his wife's service. He's got a eulogy to deliver. Bear, slowly coming back to reality, gripped Ethan's hand, his breathing steadying under Father Callahan's gentle prayers. John, you're safe, the priest murmured, his voice a lifeline. Emily's waiting inside. Your Marines are here. Your kids are here. Bear's eyes focused, the Afghan dust fading, replaced by the tear-streaked faces of Ethan and Lily. Emily, he whispered, his voice breaking. I need to say goodbye. Whitaker made a decision that would echo beyond Franklin. All units, form an honor guard, she ordered. The officers, chastened, lined up beside the Marines, their differences forgotten in the face of a shared duty. Together, cops and Marines formed a corridor of respect, their boots snapping in unison, escorting Bear back to St. Paul's. The congregation rose as Bear entered, supported by Ethan and Lily, his suit torn, blood drying on his brow, taser marks burning his chest, but his eyes were locked on Emily's casket draped in white roses. Father Callahan resumed, the organ swelling with a hymn Emily had sung to her children. The mourners, weeping and in stunned silence, watched as Bear, a warrior broken and rebuilt, prepared to honor the woman who'd been his home. Bear stepped to the pulpit, his hands shaking as he unfolded his eulogy. Emily, he began, his voice cracking, you taught me what it means to be brave, to love, to come home. His words, raw and haunting, poured out, a testament to a woman who'd held a family together through war and peace, a love that no taser, no badge could break. The church filled with sobs, every heart shattered by the Marines' brotherhood, the tragedy, the hero's unyielding spirit. The sanctuary of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Franklin, Tennessee, was a sea of tears and silent reverence as John Bear Sullivan stepped to the pulpit. His dress suit was torn, blood crusted above his scarred brow, and the raw marks of taser barbs burned beneath his shirt. Yet, as he unfolded the crumpled paper bearing his eulogy, his 6'3" frame seemed to grow taller, as if the weight of 20 years with Emily gave him strength no trauma could shatter. Ethan and Lily, his teenage children, stood at the front pew, their faces streaked with tears but fierce with pride. Behind them, 30 Marines in dress blues formed a silent wall of brotherhood, their white gloves clenched, eyes glistening. The congregation, family, friends, Emily's hospital colleagues, and strangers drawn by the unfolding tragedy held their breath. Emily, Bear began, his voice rough but steady, you were my North Star. When I was lost in the desert, when the bombs fell, when I didn't think I could come home, you were the light that brought me back. His words faltered and he gripped the pulpit, his silver star gleaming faintly on his chest. You taught me to love, to fight, to be a father. You held our family together when I was broken. And now, his voice cracked, a tear tracing the scar on his cheek. Now, I have to let you go. But I swear, I'll make you proud. For Ethan, for Lily, for every day you gave me. The church erupted in sobs. Father Thomas Callahan, standing beside the rose-draped casket, bowed his head, his lips moving in silent prayer. The organ swelled, carrying Emily's favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, as Bear stepped down. Ethan and Lily rushing to his side, the congregation rose as one. Their applause a thunderous tribute, not just to Emily, but to Bear's unyielding courage. Outside, the honor guard of Marines and police officers stood vigil, their boots snapping in salute as Bear passed, a warrior honoring his wife despite the wounds of body and soul. But the story didn't end with the closing of St. Paul's doors. It exploded into the world beyond. By dusk, cell phone videos of the confrontation had flooded social media. Clips of Officer Ryan Carter tasing Bear, of 30 Marines storming out to protect their brother, of Ethan and Lily comforting their father through his PTSD flashback. Each frame was a gut punch to millions. The hashtag Justice for Bear trended worldwide within hours. the raw footage a stark symbol of a hero wronged and a system failing its veterans. Comments poured in. This is America's shame. Semper Fi, Bear. Cops need to learn respect. The video of Bear's eulogy, leaked by a mourner, went viral, its raw emotion breaking hearts across the nation. That's what love looks like, one user wrote. That's what honor means. Within 48 hours, the Franklin Police Department announced Officer Carter's termination. Lieutenant Sarah Whitaker, her face grim at a press conference, addressed the nation. Officer Carter's actions were a betrayal of our values. We failed John Sullivan, his family, and our community. We will do better. The crowd outside the station, holding signs reading Honor Our Vets and Justice for Bear, roared in approval, but their anger lingered. Carter, stripped of his badge, vanished from public view, his career in ruins. Rumors swirled that he'd left Tennessee entirely, unable to face the backlash. The department didn't stop at firing Carter. Whitaker, alongside Master Sergeant David Titan Brooks, launched a sweeping reform. Franklin PD introduced mandatory training on military cultural awareness and de-escalation, using Bear's case as a cornerstone. No veteran should ever face what John Sullivan did, Whitaker said, her voice cracking. Not at their spouse's funeral, not ever. The program, dubbed Valor and Respect, paired officers with local Marine veterans, fostering understanding over coffee and shared stories. Titan, a grizzled legend, led the first session, his presence commanding respect from cops and Marines alike. Bear, meanwhile, was far from healed. The taser's physical wounds faded, but the PTSD episode had left scars deeper than any IED blast. Nightmares of Kandahar bled into memories of Emily's final days, her hand cold in his as the machines flatlined. Yet Ethan and Lily became his anchors. Late at night, when Bear woke screaming, Ethan sat with him, recounting Emily's stories to ground him. Lily, with her quiet strength, left notes on his nightstand. You're still our hero, Dad. The Marines, too, never left his side. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hawk Reynolds and Master Sergeant Elena Viper Cruz checked in daily, bringing meals, sharing laughs, reminding Bear he wasn't alone. 6 weeks after the funeral, Bear stood before a crowd at Franklin's Veterans Hall, his first public speech since the incident. The room was packed, Marines, police officers, community members, even national reporters. His hands shook as he spoke, but his voice carried the weight of a man who'd walked through hell and come out fighting. PTSD isn't a weakness, he said. It's the price of war. I've buried brothers, lost my wife, and been tased at her funeral. But I'm still here because of my kids, my Marines, and this community. Veterans deserve respect, not suspicion. Emily believed in standing up for what's right. I'm here to honor that. The crowd leapt to their feet, tears streaming, their applause shaking the walls. Bear's words sparked a movement. He began speaking across Tennessee, then nationwide, sharing his story at police academies, VA hospitals, and Marine bases. His message about PTSD, military culture, and the need for compassion resonated deeply. John Sullivan's voice is changing America, a CNN anchor declared, as clips of his speeches racked up millions of views. The incident's impact reached Washington. 8 months later, Congress passed the Sullivan Act, mandating cultural sensitivity training for law enforcement, with a focus on veterans and Gold Star families. President Harris signed it into law at a ceremony where Bear, Ethan, and Lily stood beside her, the Marines in dress blues forming an honor guard. This is for Emily, Bear said quietly, his hand on Lily's shoulder. The law was a triumph, but Bear knew it was only a start. Too many veterans still faced misunderstanding. Too many families bore the weight of war's aftermath. In Franklin, a new chapter began. Bear, with Titan and Whitaker, founded the Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to bridging the gap between veterans and police. Its motto, inspired by Emily's words, was carved into its logo. The best of America happens when good people stand up for what's right. The foundation trained officers, supported PTSD programs, and ensured no Gold Star family faced disrespect. At its first gala, held in Emily's memory, a memorial garden was unveiled, white roses blooming around a plaque bearing her name. Bear, standing with Ethan and Lily, fought back tears as Viper read Emily's favorite poem. Invictus, its lines echoing Bear's resilience. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Yet the story wasn't over. A year after the funeral, as Bear prepared for a national tour with the foundation, a letter arrived, postmarked from an unknown address. The handwriting was shaky, the words raw. I was wrong, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make it right. It was unsigned, but Bear knew. Carter, the former officer, had disappeared. But whispers reached Franklin of a man volunteering at a veterans shelter in Montana, teaching de-escalation to small-town cops, his face haunted by regret. Baird stared at the letter, his jaw tight, torn between forgiveness and the pain of that day. Ethan, now 18 and enlisting in the Marines, read it over his shoulder. "What you gonna do, Dad?" he asked. Bear didn't answer. He folded the letter, slipped it into his pocket, and stepped outside, where the Tennessee sunset burned gold over St. Paul's steeple. The church steps, once stained with his blood, now bore a small plaque, in honor of Emily Sullivan, whose love united a community. Bear's eyes lingered on it, Emily's voice whispering in his mind, "Stand up for what's right. Confront Carter, forgive him, or let the past rest," as Emily would have wanted. As he turned to walk home, a car slowed on the street. A man stepped out, his face half hid in shadow, his posture rigid, like a soldier reporting for duty. "Sullivan," the man said, his voice low, trembling. Bear froze, his hand tightening on the letter in his pocket. The man stepped closer, the streetlight catching his face. Older, gaunt, but unmistakable. "Carter." "I need to talk," Carter said, his eyes locked on Bear's, a storm of guilt and resolve swirling within them. "Not for me, for someone else." Bear's heart pounded, the scars on his face burning as the weight of a new battle loomed. What did Carter want? Who was someone else? And could Bear face the man who'd nearly broken him? On the steps where he'd said goodbye to Emily, the Tennessee night held its breath, waiting for Bear's next move.